I have to remind you that a parking study is not something that's in your regulations to be required of this applicant or any other house of worship, nor has it ever been asked of any other house of worship. We provided the parking calculations for maximum seating capacity based upon fixed seating. The parking calculation ratio was applied to it. And even as Mr. Beatty just mentioned, the site meets the code. Your inquiry about parking should end there. It should not go beyond that and speculate on what could happen or what might happen. This Gurdwara, this house of worship, has been designed to meet the code, and it meets the code in exactly the same way every other house of worship has designed its parking requirement and has been reviewed. Just to call your attention to one most recent one, as I mentioned before, the Northeast Community Church on East Avenue. It presented a floor plan showing maximum seating capacity of 125 that required 25 parking spaces. No other inquiry took place beyond the presentation and submission of that plan and that calculation. The same is true for all of the other churches and houses of worship for which I provided the memo describing them, describing their needs, describing their maximum seating capacities, describing their parking requirements. To require this house of worship to do something different that every other house of worship has not been asked to do is unequal treatment to them. And I will stand by that. And I think that is something you should be very concerned about requiring and requesting. The site meets the code in terms of parking, and the inquiry on parking really should end there. I don't know what else to tell you other than parking and traffic are two different beasts. They relate, yet they are not tied together. And the traffic study that has been provided by SLR revealed to you that the levels of service, which is required to be evaluated, are either A or B, and there is one turning motion that is level of service C. The traffic study reveals that traffic generated by this house of worship is more than acceptable and more than meets your standards. Don't know what else I can tell you, but I caution you on requiring things that have never, ever been required of any other house of worship.
Thank you.
Attorney Suchy, if I could ask a follow-up question. First of all, you've reminded us at least 4 times tonight to be careful about how we judge. I'm trying to be careful. Part of the special permit application requires that we protect the neighbors, as you know. And I'm still not clear as to what was wrong with what I was asking you in terms of, and asking your architect in terms of the maximum seating capacity. You said to me, it's how it's always been done. And I said to you, this is my first foray into a church. So just explain to me why my question about maximum seating capacity and determining the number of seats and parking spaces was wrong.
I wasn't suggesting, Mr. Roina, that you were wrong. All I was suggesting is that the way in which this house of worship provided information on its maximum seating capacity is exactly the same as every other house of worship that I evaluated has done. They've provided a plan, signed and sealed by an architect.
Does that mean that, are you saying that every other house of worship represents what their maximum capacity is, and that's it? That's what we're supposed to take?
Based upon the analysis, my review of 15 files, yeah, a plan was provided, signed and sealed by an architect. It showed what the maximum capacity was, and the parking calculation was based upon that number. That's all
I'm not familiar with the East Avenue piece that you're talking about, but the houses of worship that are in the area that we are talking about, and the house of worship that I'm familiar with across the street from my house are acres of property. And as our traffic consultant pointed out, there's no place to go on this after the 55 parking spaces. And there's no parking on Richards Avenue, as we know. So that leaves Fireside Court and whatever the other one-way street is for overflow parking, which happens, I guess, quite a bit there. But the point is that you're bringing an application that absolutely maximizes the use of the property. And yes, does it meet zoning requirements? I guess it does. But I think that we're entitled as part of our review of a special permit application to consider these questions. And I don't see it, it's certainly not from my standpoint and my trying to punish your clients or prejudiced against your clients or however you want to put it. I'm just concerned about the effect that this substantial project on this property is going to have on the neighbors.
And Mr. Roina, your concerns are certainly valid concerns, and I in no way meant to insinuate that they were not. All I'm trying to do is to explain that the regulations as exist today are the ones that we developed under. And were there other desires or other preferences for whether it's the size of the lot or the density of buildings for house of worship or parking? There was an opportunity to change those, to address concerns.
Yes, there was. That
may have existed for several years. So my clients buy a piece of property with the full knowledge that the use is allowed, and they design in accordance with the regulations. And all we're saying is we comply. Should there be other
I just want to make sure that you and I are understanding each other. You're telling me that you comply because you've submitted an application that says this is the maximum capacity and we have to accept that. And if that's the case, if that's what you're saying, I understand now why you were questioning what I was saying. I'm not saying that I buy it, but I understand.
Well, but what I'm also saying to you, Mr. Roina, is to require something more of this denomination is very different.
It's not this denomination,
but
it's this project.
No, it's this denomination's project.
No, okay, don't put words in my mouth.
But nothing like this has been asked of any other house of worship.
So does that mean that we can't learn as we go along? That means that just because we made a mistake 15 times in a row, it can't be addressed?
Of course you can, but there's a process to make changes to address those concerns.
No, the changes that you're talking about are the way things have been done. The code is pretty clear as to what the parking requirements are supposed to be. But I don't want to beat this to death. I just wanted to understand why you and I were not on the same page, seemingly. So thank you for clarifying.